Welcome to Warrior, the Art of War for Life, a podcast for those who want to win. Leadership lessons, motivational mindsets, empowering principles, success strategies, and transformational tactics from Sun-Tzu, the master of victory. I'm your guide on the side, David Boyd, award-winning educator, transformational speaker, and certified life coach. It's time to start winning at life. Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you guys are here. This is our second installment of the Warrior Mindset Unplugged. And today, I'm really privileged to have a friend and a mentor, Brigadier General Paul Pirog, with us today to talk about some of the lessons that he's learned and share some great stories. And it's just I feel really privileged. I've always looked up to you as a mentor, and I'm really grateful for the strong kind of calm leadership that you've always demonstrated. And we've known each other for 15 years.
Yes.
And I've always respected that, about you, the quiet strength. It's not the in your face, my way or the highway sort of thing. But I've always admired that about you. I've always respected that about you. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring that on. I think sometimes we get stuck in this warrior mindset. It's got to be the alpha male, and we got to cook outdoors, and we got to break stuff and blow stuff up, And you really modeled a more well-rounded form of leadership. So, with that, I'll give you a few minutes to introduce yourself to everybody, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Dave. I'm honored to be here, and all those things he said about me earlier are lies, nothing but lies. But we have known each other for 15 years.
We will not lie, steal, or cheat.
That is true. He hasn't done that. But one of the things I like to start as a former judge advocate, a lawyer in the Air Force, is that all the opinions expressed are my own solely, and that it shouldn't be attributed to the Department of Defense, the Air Force, or the Air Force Academy. So with that clear, happy to talk about anything you'd like to. I spent 37 years in the Air Force. That's after 4 years here at the Air Force Academy. Graduated in 1977. And then was a B-52 navigator for the next a little bit more than 4 years after graduation, biological science major, and then switched career fields and went to law school, University of Michigan. And
got to go back home.
Got to go back home. I'm from Michigan originally, and became a JAG after law school, and then did about 32 years there, with my last assignment being here at the Air Force Academy for about 12 years, from 2002 to 2014. And I've been retired for almost 10 years now.
Wow, it's been 10 years.
Yes, it has.
Goodness.
And by the way, something very interesting, I came to the Academy at age 18. As a cadet, you're under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the criminal law. As an officer, you obviously are. But as a retiree, you are still under the UCMJ. So I've been under a criminal code, the military's criminal code, for 75% of my life.
Wow.
And that it kind of helps formulate your respect for the law, especially the criminal code.
It's interesting. And that's not something we see a lot nowadays. There's a lot of disrespect for the law in our country, and sometimes, working with China, we see these posts, and half of them are from, the Chinese trolls who, are all over the internet and saying how great socialism is and how great China is, and their system of law is a disaster. As a matter of fact, we were talking about this in my class today. I had a cadet ask me, what is the legal system like? And in China, you are guilty until proven innocent. And nobody wants to get the courts involved. I've seen cash transactions. Hey, how much can I give you to keep this out of court? And that's the general sentiment: is don't get involved with the courts. And it's a big pain. But so.
Well, I think respect for the law. I mean, for me, obviously the UCMJ, but also how your parents bring you up. I have had four brothers and one sister, so 6 of us. my dad was sort of a disciplinarian, and so you obeyed the law. Otherwise, there were consequences. On the other hand, we got to run free and had lots of, you could call it discretion, but it was, go out and play in the woods and come home, when it was supper time. That you could get in a lot of trouble that way, but if you got in trouble, not only would the townspeople get you, your dad would not be a happy camper either. So all of that, I think, helped at least our family. We're all productive citizens and doing well, and nobody's been in federal prison for more than 2 or 3 years. No, nobody has gone to prison or anything like that.
Interesting. So you decide to come to the academy, and you're coming in just after Vietnam and kind of still very much in the height of the Cold War era. What was that like for you? What was your motivation for coming to the academy, wanting to join the Air Force? What was going through your mind then?
Well, I do have my draft cards. So they were drafting all the way till, I believe, like the 27th of January, if you were 18 or above. My birthday was the 3rd of February, so I turned 18 right after that, but I still had to register. The last person drafted for Vietnam, I just looked this up, was the 30th of June, 1973. My report date at the Air Force Academy was 1 July, 73. So it was... Now, one of the reasons, quite frankly, I started thinking about college, and I thought, how am I going to pay for this? Our family was big and not all that well off. Now, I had a brother 2 years ahead of me who went to West Point. He was out of the blue. My dad was in the Navy in World War II, and my brother thought he had applied to West Point. He got accepted there, and he got a congressman to appoint him there. And so with that in mind, I thought, well, let me try the Air Force Academy. And I got an acceptance of both West Point and Air Force Academy, in part, I think, because my brother was doing well at West Point, and the same congresswoman nominated me. And I decided, I'll go somewhere else. Don't want to follow him around. So ended up at the Air Force Academy, and it was in Colorado. Who'd ever heard of Colorado? From Michigan,
Right.
It just wasn't on the tip of our tongues. And so I ended up out here. It wasn't necessarily, I want to be part of the United States Air Force, though, being in the military would, it wasn't I was opposed to it or anything, but the education I heard was super. Wasn't going to cost me or the family money, and it was going to be a challenge, and I enjoyed challenges.
Okay. And you avoided some sibling rivalry, or maybe created some sibling rivalry?
Oh yes. I got a sympathy card from all his friends. And I still have it to this day. It say, "Dear Paul, we have enjoyed running you to death," or, "You stupid idiot Air Force guy, you should have joined the Army," that kind of stuff.
All in good fun.
Yes, it was. But
Okay.
I'm glad I went to the Air Force.
So 4 years here at the Academy.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say was the most important lesson you learned during that time?
I'd say probably teamwork. I end up as a distinguished graduate, but yet I never left the squadron. I was never on group staff or wing staff, any of the, from a military standpoint, areas that would really make you high up in that area. Your graduating order of merit was based on your athletic ability, your military order of merit, and your academics, mostly your academics. And so, I worked hard in academics, but I stayed with the squadron and got to know the people and what it took to get everybody's talent involved in going forward. When I initially got to the academy, my first year was tough. Survival was the goal. The last 3 years, my first year as a sophomore, you were an upperclassman, and so you were thought, now I can be treated like a young Air Force officer. Unfortunately, the class that ran the squadron I went into didn't think that. And they told us that we were smacks with talking privileges. As a sophomore, a smack was a derogatory term for a freshman. And we said, what? And that's how they treated us that entire sophomore year. So that made our squadron, the group of, and it was all men's school at that time, group of guys become very close together. So at my 45th reunion, which was just in October last year, we had 17 out of about 23 people come back for the reunion, which is a hope. It was more than any other squadron of our class. Anyway, but our last 2 years had one of the best air officer commandings, officer leader that I've ever seen. He was an Army guy, and we still keep in touch with him to this day. Just a wonderful man who knew about leadership, and so he taught us those sorts of things about being last in line when it was time to eat, for instance, if you're the senior person, and getting everybody to participate and trying to motivate people, or if they had problems, which people do, having them realize what their problem is so they could fix it. I think all those lessons were important, and I don't think I really understood them all when I was at the Air Force Academy, but looking back, especially 37 years later, you go, wow.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, you mentioned the importance of teamwork and really getting to know people, and that's something that I try and instill in my cadets right now too. A lot of the times, like I say, hey, you need to surround yourself with people who you can be real with, and not just, hey, how's it going? Oh, I'm great. How are you? Yeah, great. See you later. Like, because when things get hard, those are not the people that are going to have your back, and I always start with be that for somebody else, right? You decide how you want to show up in those relationships and making that effort to really be active in the squad. But I think by the time this episode airs, we will have covered this famous quote in The Art of War, which is "Know yourself and know others," and the ability to do that is a secret that he talks about for leadership, for victory. That if you know yourself and you know your teammates, you know the enemy even, if you have that understanding, but especially the people in your unit, that even defeat won't break you. And I've always kind of resonated with that, because sooner or later we're all going to lose something. We're going to make some mistakes, but they don't have to be devastating.
Right. I've made my share of mistakes.
Yeah, as we all.
And from B-52s to, from a work standpoint, leading people as a senior JAG at a base, to putting the wrong glaze on a piece of pottery. There's learning in all those areas. By the way, for your audience, I do throw pottery now, which is something I picked up after I retired. So
yeah, and he's actually really good. I have several pieces in my office, and they sit there right next to my Ming Dynasty pottery. So they have a distinguished place of honor, and I would actually drink out of those before I drink out of anything from the Ming Dynasty.
Good move.
Yeah. So we'll talk more about the pottery. Let's talk about flying.
Okay.
So you commission. Right, you come out of the academy and you get navigator, and you knew that, right, going in, so you were going to be navigator.
Well, I knew that in the last 2 months before I was going to go to nav school.
And so tell me about that. What was that like?
Well, I went back. Nowadays, the class gets, I think, 90 days, or is it 60 days?
Yeah,
90
60 days.
60 days after of vacation, of leave, after you graduate, and then you go to your first assignment. Or sometimes you have to, if you're going to pilot training, sometimes you have to wait, but they give you another assignment. For us, it was only 30 days. And so there are some people who volunteered to even cut some of that so they could get to navigator school to be first up. Well, I ended up going at about day 45, and so I was in the second class of academy grads that were going through nav school. And it was a great experience. It was in Sacramento, California. Hadn't been in California. What a beautiful area it was. And I got married over Christmas vacation to a lady who I'd known since 7th grade in a different city. And we just enjoyed California. Navigator school was great. I did very well in it and graduated #1 in my class. So when the time came for aircraft, everyone put a list. I'd like this plane or this aircraft, this one. And unfortunately that year, or fortunately in the long run, they decided to maximize everyone's choices. And so if you put #1, I want an FB 111, and no FB 111s came down, okay. But an F-111 came down. You had that too, even though you graduated number one. They gave it to somebody who asked for it as number one, so that they would maximize their choice. Well, unfortunately, every plane I asked for, someone else had asked for it higher. So I graduated number one and got my last choice of aircraft, a B-52. And it was a D model, which was the slowest, the oldest. As it turned out, it was fantastic. But I was a little disappointed leaving the Air Force, leaving Navigator School in California. And so I was assigned to Carswell Air Force Base, which is in Fort Worth, Texas. Never had been to Texas. Tell you, go join the Air Force.
Yeah.
Anyway, and was there as a navigator, eventually instructor navigator, member of the standardization evaluation crew for about close to 5 years, and sat on nuclear alert during the Cold War time frame. So we would for a week, a month, sometimes a week and a half or more per month, you would go on alert and be away from your family and be ready 24/7 to be within 5 minutes of your airplane, jump on the airplane and go off and do your appropriate wartime thing that you had to do if the balloon went up.
Right.
And so it was interesting during those time frames because some of the folks who we flew with during that time frame were Vietnam vets, and they had bombed and flown over Vietnam during war. And I remember my radar navigator at the Bombardier on the aircraft said one time, "Oh yeah, I can remember a mission. We were getting ready to drop our bombs, and we heard United Flight 325 reporting in at 39,000." So there were civilian airplanes flying in the general area while they were dropping bombs on Hanoi or North Vietnam or what have you. And I just thought, I'm not sure I could do that. But regarding our mission, we knew that if we got sent off to go do bad things, we knew there was going to be nothing left behind, because that's the only reason we were going to go. And so when you have that attitude, well, of course I'm going to, because my family's gone. Break to the modern time when I'm here at the Air Force Academy, and people graduating are going right to Iraq, going right to Afghanistan in the wars. And I thought back to my Bombardier talking about civilian flights going on in life as well, and we're bombing and almost getting killed, or maybe getting killed, in the middle, with everything going on around. And that's what it was like again. And I'm sure I could do it, but I applaud all those graduates that you and I sent out there who have done it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an easy thing, right? I mean, this is why the art of war opens with the caveat that war is a big deal. Right? This is a major affair of state, and it should not be taken lightly. And there's a cost associated with it. And there are definitely times to fight, and there are times, from Sun-Tzu's perspective, he has a lot of questions to get the ruler thinking about. Is this a hill worth dying on? Do I really want to invest the blood, sweat, and tears of my people over this?
Sure, he didn't go to law school, because that's the type of questions lawyers get to ask. But
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's a really interesting thought about that. As certainly you make that transition from nav school to law school to become a JAG, and so what was that like for you? The process there. Why switch?
In part, some of it, I'll admit, was the navigator career field was starting to. Aircraft were getting more modernized, didn't need navigators anymore. So you were kind of excess baggage, and you had to go off and do something, but sometimes those somethings weren't exactly the best jobs in the world. So the pecking order was pilots on top, and then it became all these not rated, not pilot navigator or anything like that, but people are doing finance or legal or contracting, whatever. We're getting the next nice pats on the back, and finally navigators were considered almost like third-class property. And so it was like, do I really want to do that? And when I was here at the academy, I was always a good arguer, and you could ask my mom and dad about that. And so I took the law school aptitude test and did really well. when it came time, I thought, well, there's this program in the Air Force called Funded Legal Education Program where they sent about 19 to 20 Air Force officers from various career fields to law school. And as long as your career field would release you, they would send you off, and then you would go to law school, become a JAG, and they'd pay for it. And so it was a funded program. So I said, this sounds a pretty good deal. So I applied for it. I got selected by the people who select that. But I got accepted by the University of Michigan, a great law school. But my navigator career field wouldn't let me go. And I thought, oh, well, you got to be kidding. So they said, well, next year we'll look at you again. I said, okay. Then I went back to Michigan and said, Michigan, can you defer my admission to next year? They said, your LSATs are pretty old, Paul. You need to retake it. And I thought, oh, I've been out of school for 5 years now. I ended up doing okay. I mean, I did it almost as well as I did the time before, so I was happy with that. Got accepted in Michigan, navigators let me go, and I got to go to law school. And by the way, my folks lived, we were only a half hour away from my folks. By that time, we had 2 children. One was born in Ann Arbor, and so it was great for that family sort of thing. But,
Sure.
But it was hard work, switching your mind from reading to understand how to do something. Drop a bomb, work the bomb nav system, versus reading for ideas and thoughts and reading with attention to detail. And holy cow, it was mind-opening. I thought I'd get ahead of the class the first day. Oh, I'm going to go in and see if there's any readings for the first day of class. So I went in the day before. I had 100 and some odd pages I was supposed to read for day 1.
Oh my goodness.
I'm glad I went in, but it was like, this is their expectation, and it was.
So let's talk about mindset then going into this. And mindset is really important to me, to the podcast, and really is woven in and out of the art of war. So you go to the academy, you have a certain mindset. You go and you're a navigator, you've got a mindset there. Were there certain commonalities or things that transferable skills that you were able to take? What was your mindset approaching each one of these challenges, law school being a big one?
I must admit, I had a mindset with principles, but not, here's what I'm going to do as a cadet. I was not real goal oriented. It was kind of like, I'm going to survive each day. And yeah, I would bend my way toward something. I was short-term goals, but I'm not really sure I had real solid long-term goals. That's
stage.
Me at that stage. As I served longer in the military, I understood that the 2 most important things were get the mission done, mission accomplishment. Okay, that was number 1, and then the second one was good order and discipline. I learned that more as a JAG, as a judge advocate. You can't, there was a commandant here a number of years ago who said, my mission here as a commandant is people first, mission always. And I thought, that's wrong. Because if people were first, you would never send them up the hill against the bad guys. You would never say, take out that cave, there could be some, you would never say, you could get shot down on this mission if people were first. It's got to be the mission first. Now, how do you get the mission done? Well, you have to have well-trained people that will be subject to discipline, that are disciplined to do what you ask them to do, what you tell them to do. Well, you can't get that if you're the world's worst leader and you treat people like dog crap. You do it by knowing them, knowing their talents, motivating them, all those sorts of things. So it's certainly wrapped up into it. But good order and discipline is number 2, mission's number 1, and it's kind of a bugaboo of mine. I challenge any military leader to say something different, because that's not right, and they shouldn't be serving in their capacity if the mission is not first. Now, that doesn't mean you do things illegal, immoral, unethical to get the mission done,
yeah.
Certainly. But your job is to get the mission done, assuming that all those things are taken care of. And in the military, I couldn't control what the mission was. I moved from job to job to job, and each one changed. But the principles that I used, mission first, good order and discipline. How do I get good order and discipline? I got to be working with those people all the time. The team playing also comes into to that as well.
Yeah. So you talk about discipline, and discipline is one of Sun Tzu's 5 key attributes for generals. When he says there's 5 strategic success factors that you have to win. And one of them is you have to have generals with good leadership attributes. And one of those attributes is discipline. And one of the ways that he looks at discipline is the ability to continue on in the face of detractors and naysayers and people who say, no, that's not the right way to do it, or you're never going to get there. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, that idea of good order and discipline, because when we don't have that good order and discipline, things fall apart. It is impossible to carry out the mission. At a certain point, it impacts, and he even says leaders, generals, and in a more general sense of leadership in general, right? That we have to have those leadership attributes, and mission first, right? I mean, it does. He talks about it in terms of this big deal. We need to have that mission. We need to have clarity on what our mission is. And we start with the end in mind. We have our outcome, and then we work backwards, just like you did, right? Well, how do we get there? Well, we have to have good order and discipline. And how do we get good order and discipline? We got to know our folks. We got to use them appropriately.
And as a young officer, because I wasn't in charge of, as a B-52 navigator, I wasn't in charge of anybody. It was hard to even think about those sort of things. You knew, as a team player, as a crew member, you had to know your stuff, you had to help others, and you had to have a good attitude. But that's different than the mission accomplished. Well, I guess, knowing your job, because eventually you get the mission done. But when you're not in charge of things, you don't, I don't think you see as far, you don't reflect on what you're trying to do as well. And so back to your original question, that's something I think cadets ought to do perhaps more, is to sit back and reflect a little bit and think a little bit bigger picture, and not just what they're going to go out and be a F-22 pilot, and it's larger than that. But it's probably not going to happen until they're more senior anyways. So
yeah, I mean there's value in doing that, right? At any stage of life, really thinking about, what do I actually want? What do I want? And this is something I talk about a lot in the podcast, is what do I want in my life? What do I want out of my life? And what do I want for my life? And thinking about those, those
and it
questions.
Changes.
It does. It changes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's okay that it changes.
Yeah.
Right?
And depending if you're in a partnership with somebody, like a spouse, my sense was at the beginning of our marriage, or when we first started to have children, was like, I'm going to be working hard, doing this thing for the Air Force or go in law school or whatever. That's my mission, get that done. Your mission, should you decide to accept, no, your mission is to raise our children. I mean, I certainly was involved in that, but not near anywhere as close as what my wife did, and to raise them to be good and productive members of society. Now here we are with 3 grandchildren many years later, and I actually got to change diapers and take care of them and all that kind of good stuff, and see what kind of mission my wife was doing way back when, and it changes. So now my mission is, quite frankly, family, friends, and faith. And that's a lot different than mission accomplishment, good order, discipline.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So, you talk about the importance of family and some of these, family, faith. Obviously, I know you're a man of faith and how important that is to you. How did that kind of play out for you as a JAG? You saw a lot of stuff. The good, the bad, the ugly. And you also were in a position to advise and give counsel to senior leadership on how to handle those situations, how to prevent some of those things. You worked with a lot of different people. What would you say was your biggest takeaway in terms of what you learned about leadership during all those years as a JAG?
There are all sorts of ways to practice leadership. There were some people who did it by just dint of their personality. They were charismatic. They'd be 50 years old, running with special operations 20-year-olds, and they come in second. So they were driven to excellence.
Yeah.
There are other people that did it through more standoffish hands, having good people, appointing the right people, and then letting them run with the ball, and then giving them fences to stay within. And so I must admit, during my time frame of advising commanders, and there were a number of them, I'd say they were all good, honorable people, quite frankly, who listened to me. And that, for a JAG, that's very important, because you and the commander are one in many respects. Now, sometimes they make different decisions, which is totally their and normally you give them a range of options, you'd recommend one, and sometimes if they go, hey, I'm going to do two, you're going to kill me on that one? Am I going to go to jail or whatever? It's like, no, sir. Just here's some of the things you might face for it. And he said, well, I'm going to do that. That's fine. And so now I did always, for commanders who didn't take my advice, I said, I may come back and say I told you so. And I did do that a couple times. And they were good people who understood that. So. But it was fun doing that, only because half the time you're flying by the seat of your pants, because you know the law, or your people have gotten you the law so you can translate it to a commander. But ultimately it's that relationship. You got to build a good one. And it's you knowing the mission, which is not the JAG mission, the mission of that commander. If he's a missile wing commander, well, he's got to have all his missiles ready. Well, how do you get your missiles ready? Well, you got to have all these security forces guys guarding it. Well, what do they do when they're out there in the missile fields by themselves? They shoot at animals. They drink, whiskey. They do, and so discipline in that case, or giving a person, having the JAG with the commander do some harsh military discipline. Maybe you wouldn't do that if you're in a garrison somewhere else, but out here the job was so important and so many other people were looking at you, you got to make an example. And so that sort of give and take, and trying to do the best you can, I think can be fun.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think there's a negative stigma towards the law, and we talked about it a little bit, and towards attorneys in general, and we see in TV shows they take this to the extreme, and it's heated courtroom debates and all this stuff, but you're still talking about having relationships and the art of listening. I hear you mention that, which is one of the things that I talked about in episode 4, which is how you get to game-changing tactics, how you shift the balance of power in your favor, how you tip the scales. And the step number 1 is to listen to your people, to listen to yourself, your own inner voice of wisdom, and to those around you, what they're saying, and then you look for the strategic application. And the 5th of Sun-Tzu's 5 strategic success factors is law, and it's everything from maintaining good rule and order and discipline to systematizing success. You do that through good governance and having those sort of systems in place to regulate, and it's absolutely essential for Sun-Tzu in terms of getting the mission done. You cannot achieve the mission without good rule and order, without the law. And so I appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up, because it's a different perspective, and it's not a perspective that I know much about personally. So I've learned a lot in picking your brain a little bit on this.
One of the things that kind of gave me a little bit of a leg up was being a navigator first. So I had a set of wings, which gave me some kind of cred.
Yeah.
So when
street
cred. So when you're talking to commanders, they got wings and all sorts of other things. They look at yours and go, and I've looked at the mission to try and find out what all is going, what the issues are, what the problems are. It's not a JAG just going, hey, some guy from law school is telling me what to do, and I've been in for 30 years, and so I mean that is important as well. And you gotta work hard. You have to do a lot of hard work to establish that street cred, and then that helps build the relationship. And once you're there, then it's a partnership, which team play.
Yeah, fantastic.
Team player.
So. You're in all these really important positions. You're advising a lot of high-level officials. You have the opportunity to come to the academy and then teach and mentor kind of the next generation of cadets. What was that shift like for you? Because I know, like, for me personally, one of my motivations for doing the podcast has been to share, things that I wish I would have known when I was younger. And especially when I see these cadets, I'm like, I wish I would have known this when I was your age. I wish somebody would have told me this, and to try and give them a leg up, to get them a little further. What was that transition like for you from, advising to mentoring?
Well, I didn't just merely advise as a
Right.
JAG. One of my assignments was as a senior medical law consultant. So I was assigned to a 1,350 bed hospital in the Air Force for 3 years, and the job was to be the legal advisor to the commander and all the docs and nurses and technicians who worked there. And it was so although you were still in the advising role, you certainly did and saw lots of other things. And break, I just forgot your question.
That's okay. And when you're done with this thought, talking about this shift from actually practicing and advising law to then mentoring future leaders.
And I guess the bottom line is, I'm not sure that I wasn't told that as a young cadet and as an officer, and it just blew right past me. As the medical law consultant person that I spoke about, we were responsible for an 8 Air Force Base region of hospitals as well. So Senior Doc and I would go out to visit each of those bases, and we would teach the docs about, not only it might be OBGYN practices or whatever, but how defense of OBGYN suits, or some kind of, and so I got to, as a JAG, I got to teach an awful lot of to non-lawyers. And then one of my other jobs was as the Deputy Commandant at the Air Force JAG School. And there, the Commandant left for about 4 months, so I was kind of in charge. And there, you actually were involved very heavily in training the next JAGs, who had been to law school already, all sorts of things regarding law with them. And so coming to the academy, well, I wanted to come back to the Air Force Academy, and it was a lucky assignment that I got, but I didn't think it was going to be that much different, other than having to know the law better than, we teach, a whole panoply, not just military law, but other law. And so I wanted to be smart in all those areas that the law department taught. And so that took a lot of work. So I'd be smart enough to be able to say, no, that shouldn't be in our chapter on contracting. It ought to be, focus a little bit more on this, that sort of type thing. But I enjoyed teaching. I'm not sure I was the best teacher in the world, but I've had cadets I've seen later, and as you and I discussed earlier, surprise you with, I remember when you did X, or you told Y, or what. I have no idea what you're talking about, but they remember something that you did, and that changed their life, or it changed, what happened, and it just befuddles you and it makes you feel good that you were a teacher even when you didn't know you were teaching.
Yeah, and that's really important. I think a lot of the best lessons are maybe those ones that we didn't necessarily plan out or intend, but it was a reflection of who we are, of the commitment to excellence, to those values. And so talking about this idea of influence, and you shared this story with me, and I think it's an amazing story, because one of the things that I talk about is, as we start off in kind of pursuit of what we really want in our lives, we don't know what's coming up ahead. We have no idea the experiences, the people we're going to meet, the opportunities we're going to have to serve, to have an impact. And that's something that I share with cadets all the time, is I had no idea when I was your age what was coming. But looking back now, I'm so fortunate to have had a lot of the opportunities I've had. And so you shared a story from the JAG office that was really impactful in this regard. Would you mind sharing it again?
A little more hint to which story?
So
the collateral damage, or Blackhawk Down?
Blackhawk Down. So we're talking about Blackhawk Down.
Okay. At one of our conferences, when I was a senior JAG, I was at Special Operations at the time. Major General Garrison, who was the head of the Task Force Ranger in Somalia during the time of Blackhawk Down, 1993, when there was a civil war in Somalia and we were trying to help there, he said, now you JAGs out there, don't forget that your importance to the mission is not due necessarily to your proximity to the target. And we kind of didn't understand that. And he says, okay, what do you think about when I say that? He says, number one is your importance to the mission is not told by your proximity to the target. It's not how far away, distance-wise. Certainly the people who put the bombs on the target, they're pretty important. But who loaded those bombs? You know, it's the munitions people. Who made that plane worthy? The maintenance people. Who, you know, did that? Who trained the pilots? Well, the instructor pilot. And you go back and back and back. And then the second part is time. The story General Garrison told us to us JAGs was much earlier, before that 1993 time frame. One of the NCOs who was involved in that battle later on got caught up in a travel fraud voucher case, and people were submitting travel vouchers fraudulently. Well, he was part of it. He wasn't a ringleader or anything like that. Moment he's, oh gosh, they were my friends. I shouldn't have done it. He confessed up, and so the prosecutor at that time threw a bunch of the guys, discharged them, threw them in jail. But for this person, they said, hey, he came clean. He was trying to do his best. We're going to take all his stripes from him, but we're not going to kick him out of the Air Force. So he stayed and ended up going through special operations and stuff like that. Well, he was in the Battle of Mogadishu 10 years later, was one of the last people out there. His folks had fled or had died, and he saved 25 people by staying at his post and killing the bad guys. And then, unfortunately, died during the battle. So 25 people and more owe their lives to this, but they also owe it to the JAG who did the right thing 15 years or 10 years earlier. So your importance to the mission is not according to the proximity to the target, both distance and time. And so that, I think, says something about what we were in the business when we were as teachers, as professors.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not just this mission, it's every mission that comes after, right? It's the people that they become, it's where they end up being. And it doesn't matter whether that mission is in combat or in mentoring or, you know, solving the world's problems. It's an amazing story.
Or helping an old lady across the street.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing. You know, that's something I think that I learned at the academy, but especially later on as a JAG, and especially as a colonel, because people tended in the military to look at colonels a little differently. And it's like, okay, I have to make sure that and not because I don't want to, I'm always polite to people. I try and say thank you and pat the people who are doing the littlest things on the back. You know, the person who's collecting your garbage, how's your day going? All of that, because it's important for them to understand where they are in this mission of putting the bombs on the target.
The role that they play.
Yeah.
Interesting. So in 2008, you gave a graduation speech, and you had some really...
To nav school.
To nav school, yeah.
Not the Air Force.
Back to nav school. And some really interesting lessons and nuggets there. You want to recap some of those highlights? And you can talk about seeing things differently. And you talk about how far you could see on a clear night, which was very eye-opening to me. I had no idea how far you could actually see.
If you think about it, seeing things differently. And one of the things in my life, being a B-52 nav, I was a biological science major. It's a STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics major. And then I started doing pottery, and I dabbled in some watercolor painting, and so you need to see things differently. Also, look at a telescope from time to time. I have my own. And the question was, well, how far can you see on a clear night? And most people might say, well, if I'm up high, 7 miles, maybe 8 miles. No, on a really clear night, and here in Colorado Springs the other night, you can see the Andromeda Galaxy. The Andromeda Galaxy is 2.5 million light years away. A light year is the time it takes light to go from here to here in 1 year. That's the distance. There are 5.28 trillion miles in 1 light year. And Andromeda Galaxy is 2.5 million away. So that's 2.5 million times 5 point whatever trillion. it's far away. But yet, so if you don't think about it, I can only see, no, you really can see, heck, you can see the sun, that's 94 million miles away. So you really can see a lot further than you think, and that's by looking at other people's perspectives. That's something I think I picked up along the way, and maybe as a member of, with 4 boys and an older sister, to try and think about what it was that they were thinking about when they did whatever it was. And so if you're thinking about other perspectives, it helps you to maybe not pull that trigger when you were going to, or to solve an idea in a different way. And that's kind of what diversity is all about, diversity of thought. Mm-hmm. You're trying to pull people together that have different thoughts. But if you can help do that yourself, I'm not saying you don't need those other people, but it helps. So that's I think one thing that I presented to the navigators out there in the auditorium.
It's that shift into a different perspective,
yes.
A broader perspective, and being able to see things differently. And it's so easy for us to get so myopic and so caught up in what's right here, the troubles that are right here in front of me today, this moment, and to lose sight of the bigger picture, right, so to speak, and even other people's perspectives and places in that bigger picture. Mm-hmm. We get so focused on our own problems that we forget that other people are people too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trying to think of a couple of off the top of my head. I might have to look at a note here. Can you remember some of the other wonderful? Take time for reflection, and that we've talked about already, because as younger people, my sense is I certainly did not take too much time for that. But mm-hmm. as one gets older and you start thinking about, where am I now? Am I doing, are my actions accomplishing what I'd really like to have done? If they're not, gee, should somebody change that? Yeah, me. And that's something I learned along the ways too, that I mentioned before, is you're responsible for your own actions yourself. People can treat you meanly, people can set an atmosphere of toxic whatever, but how you respond to that is totally up to you.
Yeah. And
that is a lesson I didn't learn until I was a lieutenant colonel, I don't think.
Yeah, and it was kind of a painful story.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
I kind of had a not my commander, not my boss, but a person in the JAG functional chain who was not the nicest person around, and in fact liked to toy with me because he thought I wasn't gung-ho enough or military justice wise or something, but I knew a lot of everything, just not the things that he wanted me to concentrate on. And he had his own office to run, and I had my own, and he tried to interfere with mine an awful lot. And so that got to get troublesome, and then he would be calling the JAGs at headquarters, who would then call my commander, say, you want to fire Pirog? And you go, no, Paul's doing great. And that happened like every month. This guy would call for my firing. And after a while, it started taking I was starting to feel bad. When I'd go home, my wife and 3 daughters, I would not be the nicest person around. And I discovered that I was short with people. I wouldn't help them as much as I should. And they were teenagey sort of daughters at that time, which is always a challenge for any teenager. And it finally dawned on me that, wait a minute, he can make my life miserable there, he can whatever, but I'm the one taking it out on my family. It's my actions. So I learned, don't do that. And I became a better person at home, I think a better person overall, and learned the lesson where, hey, sticks and stones can break my bones, but whatever you're doing can't really hurt me because, I can stand tall.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a really important lesson. I know that there have been plenty of times where I've taken my frustrations out wrongfully in other areas, right? And I think that it's really easy to do, and it brings me back to one of Sun-Tzu's main strategies. One of his most important ideals that he teaches is the ideal of preservation. We might be losing over here, we might be struggling in this area, but we don't have to let it spill over here. We can keep this area intact. And I think in our own lives, it's like, well, I might really be struggling financially, but I don't have to let the financial stress impact my marriage, impact my relationships with kids, or impact my health even, right? And yeah, it was really important. So when you shared that with me, that really resonated, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. He uses this idea of compartmentalization, and Chinese invented individually sealed compartments in their boats. They got the idea from bamboo because each segment is sealed individually, watertight, and realize the reason we have sealable compartments in naval vessels is because if you take damage, you take water on there, you can seal it off and you can continue the mission until you can get back and make repairs as needed. It doesn't have to flood the whole ship. And sometimes I think compartmentalization gets a bad rap because if you do it forever and you don't ever open that can of worms back up, then that's not good, right? But at the same time, we don't need to have that spillage from work into the family. We can say, okay, work is work, I'm leaving that behind. School is school, I'm leaving that behind, and I can just enjoy the kids, or I can enjoy my partner, my spouse, and I can enjoy other areas of my life. One thing doesn't have to ruin everything. And so I like we can avoid that. He was big on minimizing collateral damage.
Okay. One of the other things I mentioned to the nav class, sorry, I just thought of that, was be a lifelong student.
Yes. And
that's keeping your mind open to new horizons, to new activities, to new anything. One of the things at the Air Force Academy, I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane 5 times. I can't believe I did that, but I did. I mean, and by the time it was done, very interesting, when I was flying in the B-52s, in a B-52, the radar navigator, the bombardier, and the navigator, when you eject, you go downward. So you don't do that on the ground because you just be a bouncing ball. You have to have a certain altitude. At one point we were flying and I asked my very seasoned bombardier, I said, if we had to punch, would you get out of the aircraft? And he said no.
Really?
And I said, really? It's not hard. I've done it before. I mean, not in an ejection seat, but and there were other people who were like that, and it's like, oh, I mean,
they go down with the plane.
Yeah, and I couldn't. I mean, I don't think anyone would ever tell you that type thing. We got faith in our. And I don't think it was a faith thing. I think it was I don't want to go flying out in space, type thing. And so that's one of the reasons why I jumped out of an airplane. Which, I'd never skied before. I skied out here in Colorado. What a great place to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
I played lacrosse in intramurals. I'd never played lacrosse before. It just so there's so many, and if you're a student, you're going to try and learn new things. So that's, quite frankly, pottery. I'd never done any. I took some classes at the community center and learned how to throw pottery, and I enjoyed it, and it was an eye-opening experience. So if you don't try if you don't swing the bat, you're never going to get a hit. And sometimes you fail. Sometimes you pitch a bad bomb, as it were, but. Any event, I think it's worth the swing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, growth mindset. That's growth mindset right there. You've constantly giving yourself opportunities to shake things up, to try something different, to learn and grow in areas, especially when you identify a fear or maybe a limitation or belief. Like, I don't want to jump out of this airplane, so that means I need to jump out of this airplane.
Well, I thought about this earlier. When I was a senior at the Air Force Academy, I took 2 independent study classes in my biological science major. Second one had to do with getting rid of herbicide orange, but leave that. The other one, I was growing up deathly afraid of bees. And probably most other maybe not mosquitoes, but, well, guess what my independent study was? Insects of the Air Force Academy. So I went out every Monday on the right days and caught insects, and then during the week I would classify, I would find out what kind they were and stuff. But I was walking amongst huge areas of bees everywhere, and at first it was, and then it was, eventually I could lay down and contemplate being a senior at the Air Force Academy while the bees were just buzzing all around me. It was, and so it's like, if you're afraid of something, exactly what you said, go ahead and try it. I mean, it doesn't always work like that, but
Yeah.
this one did.
Huh. It's not that the bees changed or the insects around, but your thinking about them, your beliefs about them changed, which then changed your experience.
Yes, I mean, a bee gets close. I mean, right now, our grandchildren, when we see them, and if they see a bee, they run away because their mom got stung by one. And I try, no, or let a ladybug land on, and which they'll do. So trying to get there. It's being afraid and then trying to swat at them.
Right.
Bees don't like you swatting at them. Moving like this, that's okay, but not swatting. So, I mean, so you do change your behavior a little bit, but it's all your anxiousness about other creatures.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so last question.
Yes, sir.
This is the big one. And I gave you this one a while ago, but one of the questions I like to ask people is if you had 2 minutes to tell the world something that could make a difference in their lives, what would it be? What would you tell them? What do you wish you would have known when you were younger? And just impart that wisdom to us.
I'd written something down, so I just wanted to.
Okay.
Actually, first, we've talked about some of these. One is to be a lifelong student. Don't be afraid of learning new stuff tomorrow or the next day. I like to say that I learn something new every day. I mean, it's a kind of a trite phrase, but I think it's true. Mm-hmm. I mean, already today I've learned about Professor Boyd and how good of a conversationalist he is, and how he can take things that he has read about and tie them into modern times. And so I'm going to try and do that a little bit better the next time I have the opportunity. I can't read my writing here. And the last one is, we've talked about, don't forget that you are responsible for your actions. And I guess that would be that it's you who can decide, okay, I don't like where I am in life. Am I going to do anything about it? If your answer is no, then that's what you've decided. Then don't blame the poor economy or whatever about that. You've decided not to. But if you decide to do something, make sure you focus what you're doing on achieving the goal that you want for yourself. And if you're not, and if those things aren't helping you achieve that goal, do you need to switch the goal because it was your shot to, your goal was way too high, or do you need to change what you're doing in order to make it happen? I think those things are easier to do because I can understand them more and have more examples of them as an older person. But boy, if I could have done that and thought about it like I do now as a young person, I wish I would have.
Well, I appreciate that. And one of the things that we talk about early on in the podcast, in episode 1, I believe, the very first episode, we talk about this idea that life is kind of like a river, and we don't always get to choose what comes into our lives. But we do always get to choose how we respond. We get to choose on our little raft how we're going to navigate those rapids that come our way.
And we get to choose whether or not we'll be prepared.
Yes.
I mean, if you're in the military, have you talked to your spouse or your kids about, hey, I'm about to be deployed. It's possible Dad might not come back.
Yeah.
You got to be ready for that. Or have you talked to your brothers and sisters about, about life or about being sick, which, we all have had. I'm getting ready to go to a funeral this weekend of a classmate whose wife just died totally suddenly. And those sorts of, so that raft of life, it can throw all sorts of things at you, and being prepared and being ready for it, I think, is important.
Yeah, if you're prepared, you shall not fear.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you,
you,
Dave.
sir. I appreciate it.
You're
and
very
thank you so
welcome.
much, everybody, for listening. Please let me know what you thought. And just an absolute privilege to have a great leader here with us today.
Good
General
talker
Paul.
here. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Sorry.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. If you found this podcast impactful, please like and subscribe. and join us for new episodes every Warrior Wednesday. For more information, tools, and resources to help you in your daily battles, for questions or to work with me, shoot me an email at artofwarforlife@gmail.com. Most important, always remember the power to win resides within. There is always a way.